Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Unnamed Horror. I am Hanu, and I'm joined by Redrokaiser.
Hello. So excuse me, I've just got done eating some pizza, so
Yes.
if I sound like I'm regurgitating on something, no, it's not because I've been brought back from the dead, although it feels like my career died years ago.
Yeah. And it's not human remains this time, I swear. That's an old callback joke.
Is that what was on my pizza?
Yeah, that's an old callback joke for some of you. So this is our Unnamed Horror, the H.P. Lovecraft podcast where I read an H.P. Lovecraft horror story, and Redrokaiser makes sound effects, observations, other funny noises, and sometimes Dr. Google.
The occasional funny joke.
The occasional funny joke, and this is the second half.
Shut up, phone.
And this is the second half of Herbert West, the Reanimator. We did another Unnamed Horror where we read the first 3 parts, or 3 chapters. I will remind you, again, this is a serialized story. So technically, although these are kind of like chapters, they're actually like 3. They were posted all separately as standalone parts. And a little correction, I want to make I said at the beginning of the previous episode that it might have been in the Weird Tales magazine because that's where most of Lovecraft stories were published. But actually, this one wasn't. I went back later, and so this was published in a magazine called Homebrew, which came out in between February and July of 1922. So that's when this was published. Okay, so we're about to get...
Sounds like a beer magazine.
So we're about to get into the horror story of dead coming back to life in the life of Herbert West. And oh yeah. Actually, I did a little bit of research. You talked about the Herbert West movies or the Reanimator movies a little bit. So
Yes.
So apparently, yeah, I think the first movie is intentionally only taking elements from the first half of this, and apparently one of the sequels is supposed to be more closely adapting some of the later chapters, but who knows? So I did a little bit of research. I am curious now to kind of see some of those movies after that previous episode. Okay, but I'm going to be putting time codes here at the top of the podcast because before we get to this, Lovecraft's horror story, I have a different kind of horror story I want to tell you guys. I'll try to keep this short. No. I'll try to keep this short, but it has to do with the editing of the first half of Herbert West, the Reanimator. Okay, so I never really talk about what goes into the editing of these podcasts, but let me tell you, it's mostly a lot of audio balancing. I have tried for years to try to get me and Kaiser's voices to sync up volume-wise. It never works. So what I spend, at least a couple of hours doing, depending on the length of the podcast afterwards, is going in Power Director. And luckily, Power Director has this really nice audio tool that allows you to change the, the voice, the voice lines, the things, the mountains and the valleys. What I basically am spending most of my time doing is I'm evening out the valleys and the mountains and the audio to try to, because sometimes I'm too quiet, sometimes Kaiser's a little too quiet, sometimes Kaiser's a little too loud, sometimes very rarely I'm too loud. And people might have noticed that my voice might have sounded a bit weird in the previous episode, because the thing that tends to happen, especially in these Unnamed Horrors, because I'm actually reading a book, when my head turns away from the microphone, that's when my voice dips. So I was trying to overcompensate last time a little bit by reading a bit loudly as my head was, turned down towards the page, and it totally didn't work. So today I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to try to keep the same reading voice all throughout, and I'll just deal with it. Anywho, okay. And also, I'll also edit out some dead air, jokes that didn't work. I'll sometimes throw in a rim shot or a sad trombone, whatever is appropriate. But that's basically most of it is like audio balancing. And last time I took extra care because I knew I had the 3 chapters, and I wanted to do each of the 3 chapters with the same amount of concentration. So I did sort of each chapter separately. So I edited the whole thing together in about like 3 to 4 sessions. I took a little bit longer on the third one because I was a bit unmotivated when I started working on it. I thought like, I'll pick this up tomorrow or something. Anyway, so I get to the end of the podcast, and I'm playing us out with that shitty MIDI version of Michael Jackson's Thriller that I always use. Yeah, and then and I'm finished with the episode. I'm getting ready to render. Oops, Power Director crashes. Okay, that's fine. It means that the project file's a little too big. So what I do in those situations, usually I cut the episode in half.
That's what she said, by the way. Oh, that's what John Wayne Bobbitt's wife said. I cut this thing in half.
Oh boy, yeah. So exactly. So the solution to that, if the video file is too big, the project file is too big, you cut it in half. You save the second half as a separate project. You render them as 2 separate videos, and then you render the 2 videos together to make a big, longer video, and that usually takes care of the problem. Okay, but I had the most absolutely magnificent brain fart happen to me this time. So what I did was I did not just copy. First of all, I just roughly selected like halfway point of the podcast, and instead of doing a copy, I did a cut, and then I immediately saved. And really, that was a bit of a stupid thing to do. I kind of knew it, but I thought like, well, I'm just gonna create a new file, dump the second half, and then just hit Control S and save it. That was the plan. That's not what actually happened. I opened the new project file. I hit Control V, the project file appears in front of me, and then, for whatever goddamn reason, there's a disconnect. I think there's a disconnect between my brain and my right hand because I click render immediately. And and Power Director crashes before I had a chance to save the second half of the episode. Okay, but, I'm thinking, I cut it. Maybe it's still on the clipboard, the thing that, the space where it saves it. So, Power Director crashes, I have to force a shutdown, and then I reopen Power Director. And, Power Director's not dumb. It knows when it crashes. So then, and so that was the first mistake. The first mistake was I don't know why I hit render, because I wasn't ready to render. That was just a complete brain fart. But then I reopened Power Director, and Power Director, if it gets shut down unexpectedly, it saves the unsaved project. And it says, the first thing that a pop-up comes up and says, hey, there's an unsaved project, would you like to? And before my brain even has the time to finish the sentence, I hit no. As in the question is, do you want to restore it? I hit no, and then I'm like, oh fuck, I probably shouldn't have done that. I hit Control V, and this is when I discovered that, yes, Power Director can save, an entire project file, basically, as long as you don't shut it off in the middle. And then it's gone. I'm pissed, and then I have to redo the second half of the episode from scratch. So I accidentally deleted half the project file, and that's. And well, I would say that
sort of sounds like a weird modern retelling of Frankenstein. Trying to
bringing the podcast back from the dead. Well,
it's live. It's alive.
Yeah. Well, unlike Frankenstein, the second part of it, re-editing it through the second time, actually went a bit smoother because I kind of remember the bits that I had cut out. I kind of remember the parts where I had thrown in the sad trombone or the rim shots, because I had only just recently done it. So, in the end, doing it the second time didn't take that much longer, but I was a little worried that I was rushing it. And okay, so here's the thing. Eventually, I actually had to end up doing it in 3 chunks, the whole podcast. Even the second half, it turned out too big, so I had to cut it off into a third part. But that time, I luckily did the smart thing and didn't save, the first half before I had it, to save the second half. But the funny thing is, I do remember the original runtime of the podcast, and it was an hour and 14 minutes. The finished podcast that is now on my YouTube channel is an hour and 12 minutes and some change. So in the second editing phase, second go around, we lost somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 minutes of, stuff. I don't know what it is. I was just probably more aggressively editing like all the dead air or something from the podcast. So I don't know. I don't think I cut out any big chunks. So that was but that was just kind of a funny observation.
I bet you Howard's racism is somehow still remains in the podcast.
Oh yeah, of course. The text is still intact. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, especially what we're referring to as the third chapter, like especially that one, like like it was hard to keep a straight face through that.
Like,
which
Jesus
reminds
Christ,
me of
Howard.
Which reminds me of, I think I mentioned that it got to, like, Dave Chappelle levels of, inappropriate. And I've actually been watching a lot of Dave Chappelle bits just recently, so...
I'm H.P. Lovecraft, bitch.
Oh, boy. Like, even though that was bad, like, if there's any more, I don't think there's any really super racist parts left in Herbert West. I do remember chapter 3 was, like, the worst of it. But, like, if you thought that was bad, go check out the Dave Chappelle, what was it? The racial draft skit. That one is, it's something. It's something. Okay, but enough of my shitty stories. Let's get into Howard's story. And chapter 4 of Herbert West, the Reanimator. Are you ready to go, Kaiser?
Yes.
Yes, so chapter 4, The Scream of the Dead. Good scream. The scream of the dead man... I'll start over. The scream of a dead man gave to me that acute and added horror of Dr. Herbert West, which harassed the latter years of our companionship. It is natural that such a thing as a dead man's scream should give horror, for it is obviously not a pleasing or ordinary occurrence. But I was used to similar experiences, hence suffered on this occasion only because of a particular circumstance. And, as I have implied, it was not the dead man himself that I became afraid. Herbert West, whose associate and assistant I was... Great sentence. Possessed, the word order there was kind of poetic. And I lost my place. I just barely started that sentence. Herbert West, whose associate and assistant I was, possessed scientific interest far beyond the usual routine of a village physician. That was why, when establishing his practice in Bolton, he had chosen an isolated house near the Potter's Field. Briefly and brutally stated, West's sole absorbing interest was a secret study of the phenomena of life and its cessation, leading towards the reanimation of the dead through injections of an excitant solution. Wow. Excitant. No, sorry, I read that incorrectly. That's excitant, isn't it? Like, as in, something that excites. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Like Viagra, maybe.
Yeah, but that's...
We're talking about raising stiff, so,
The bone of the dead. For this ghastly experimenting, it was necessary to have a constant supply of very fresh human bodies. Very fresh. Yes, very fresh. Because even the least decay hopelessly damaged the brain structure. And human because... What? Oh, and human because we found that the solution had to be compounded differently for different types of organisms. Scores of rabbits and guinea pigs had been killed and treated, but their trail was a blind one. I still love the idea of the zombie guinea pigs. honestly, like, I love it. So this is, again, reminding that because this is a serialized story, and if you're getting a weird sense of deja vu, they are kind of like retreading the old story details again. But for the sake of anybody who might have not read the previous issue of Homebrew. Yeah, okay. There we go. West had never fully succeeded because he had never been able to secure a corpse sufficiently fresh. What he wanted...
Where can I find a fresh corpse around here?
What he wanted were bodies from which vitality had only just departed. Bodies with every cell intact and capable of receiving again the impulse towards the mode of motion called life. There was hope that this second and artificial life might be made perpetual by repetitions of the injection. But we had learned that an ordinary natural life would not respond to the action. To establish the artificial motion, natural life must be extinct. The specimens must be very fresh, but genuinely dead. The awesome quest had begun when West and I were students at the Miskatonic University Medical School in Arkham, vividly conscious for the first time of the thoroughly mechanical nature of life. That was 7 years before, but West looked scarcely a day older now. He was small, blonde, clean-shaven, soft-voiced, and spectacled. Like I said, every single time this narrator finds a way to make, Herbert's description shorter and shorter, and I still find that very amusing. With only an occasional flash of a cold blue eye to tell of the hardening and growing fanaticism, of his character under the pressure of his terrible investigations. Our experiences had often been hideous in the extreme, the results of defective reanimation, when lumps of graveyard clay had been galvanized into morbid, unnatural, and brainless motion by various modifications of the vital solution.
Ugh.
One thing had uttered a nerve-shattering scream.
Ah!
Another had risen violently, beaten us both to unconsciousness,
Boom, boom, pow, pow!
and run amok in a shocking way before it could be placed behind asylum bars. Still another, a loathsome African monstrosity, had clawed out of its shallow grave and done a deed. West had to shoot that object. Okay, Still very racist. Okay. We could not get bodies fresh enough to shew any trace of reason when reanimated. So had perforce created nameless horrors. Perforce? Interesting. Maybe we should do a Dr. Google at this point.
I was about to say, yep, Dr. Google time.
Yeah.
How do you spell it? Is it P-E-R?
Yeah, P-E-R-4.
That sounds like an army of cats. The first
Force, oh boy. God.
Here we go.
Yes.
Dr. Google says, used to express necessity or inevitability.
Ah. Inevitability. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. We had to raise those dead people. We had no choice. Yeah. That is an interesting word, though. Quite interesting. But now I can't stop thinking of cats. Thanks a lot for that.
Although, what you just said there, that is totally how Herbert would think.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The object is not the object. The moral of the story, of course. Don't be a hermit. Where's the perforce? Here it is. Okay. It was disturbing to think that one, perhaps two of our monsters still lived. That thought haunted us shadowingly, till finally West disappeared under frightful circumstances. But at the time of the scream in the cellar laboratory of the isolated Bolton cottage, our fears were subordinate to our anxiety for extremely fresh specimens. West was more abbot than I, so that it almost seemed to me that he looked half covetously at any very healthy living physique. I think Herbert might have been just a little bit horny, but the bone of the dead. No, okay, so let's go. You know what? I would not be surprised if there was like a porn satire of this that would be called The Bone of the Dead.
So didn't Ed Wood of all people make Orgy of the Dead?
Oh, yeah. I think he did. It did. Fascinating. It was in July 1910 that the bad luck regarding specimens began to turn. I had been on a long visit to my parents in Illinois. and upon my return found West in a state of singular elation. He told me excitedly, and in all likelihood solved the problem of freshness through an approach from an entirely new angle, that of artificial preservation. I had known that he was working on a new and highly unusual embalming compound, and was not surprised that it had turned out well, but until he explained the details I was rather puzzled as to how such a compound could help in our work, since the objectionable staleness of the specimens was largely due to delay occurring before we secured them. This, I now saw, West had clearly recognized. Creating his embalming compound for future rather than immediate use, and trusting to fate to supply again some very recent and unburied corpse, as it had years before, when we obtained the Negro killed in the Bolton prize fight. At last, fate had been kind, so that on this occasion there lay in the secret cellar laboratory a corpse, whose decay could not by any possibility have begun. What would happen on reanimation, and whether we could hope for a revival of mind and reason, West did not venture to predict.
I've got a question.
Yes?
How on earth would you keep that place a secret? I know it's in an isolated house, but you think someone would hear the moans and groans and think something sus was going on?
Well, yeah, exactly. I think they made it clear in the previous story that there was a long gap in the, before the next house over. So they're like surrounded by like mostly like farmland, and then there's the little field between them and the cemetery. So that's how. But like at the end of the previous story, when Herbert shot the boxer at the door. Like that was like the one time that they suspected that somebody might come asking them, but clearly that was not the case. They got away with it. Just some random shots in the night, and none was the wiser. The experiment would be a landmark in our studies, and he had saved the new body for my return, so that both might share the spectacle in accustomed fashion. West told me how he had obtained the specimen. It had been a vigorous man.
Hello.
Such vigor. Okay. A well-dressed stranger, just off the train on his way to transact some business with the Bolton Worsted Mills. That's a terrible name. Surely Bolton Bested Mills, but I'm Tish. Oh boy, sorry, that was a lame joke. Gotta put a wah-wah on that one. Yeah. The walk through the town had been long, and by the time the traveler paused at our cottage to ask the way to the factories, his heart had become greatly overtaxed. He had refused a stimulant and had suddenly dropped dead only a moment later.
Plonk!
The body, as might be expected, seemed to West a heaven-sent gift. In his brief conversation, the stranger had made it clear that he was unknown in Bolton, and a search of his pockets subsequently revealed him to be one Robert Leavitt, or Leavitt.
Levitt.
Yeah, Levitt. Let's go with Levitt. Robert Levitt of St. Louis. Apparently without a family to make instant inquiries about his disappearance. If this man could not be restored to life, no one would know of our experiment. We buried our materials in a dense strip of woods between the house and the potter's field. If, on the other hand, he could be restored, our fame would be brilliantly and perpetually established. So, without delay, West had injected into the body's wrist the compound which would hold it fresh for use after my arrival. The matter of the presumably weak heart, which to my mind imperiled the success of our experiment, did not appear to trouble West extensively. He hoped at last to obtain what he had never obtained before, a rekindled spark of reason and perhaps a normal living creature. So, on the night of July 18th, 1910, Herbert West and I stood in the cellar laboratory and gazed at a white, silent figure beneath the dazzling arc light.
Ooh! Ah!
The embalming compound had worked uncannily well, for as I stared fascinatedly at the sturdy frame, which had lain 2 weeks without stiffening, I was moved to seek West's assurance that
I think you need to see a doctor if that's the case.
yeah, not stiffening. Yeah. Bone of the dead. Haha. Okay.
Yeah.
I was moved to seek West's assurance that the thing was really dead. This assurance he gave readily enough, reminding me that the reanimating solution was never used without careful tests as to life, since it could have no effect if any of the original vitality were present. As West proceeded to take preliminary steps, I was impressed by the vast intricacy of the new experiment, an intricacy so vast that he could trust no hands less delicate than his own. Forbidding me to touch the body, he first injected a drug in the wrist, just beside the place his needle had punctured when injecting the embalming compound. This, he said, was to neutralize the compound and release the system to a normal relaxation so that the reanimating solution might freely work when injected.
It's alive. It's alive.
Slightly later, when a change and a gentle tremor seemed to affect the dead limbs, West stuffed a pillow-like object violently over the twitching face, not withdrawing it until the corpse appeared quiet and ready for our attempt at reanimation. The pale enthusiast now applied some last perfunctory tests for absolute lifelessness, withdrew
Yep, he's dead.
satisfied, and finally injected into the left arm an accurately measured amount of the vital elixir, prepared during the afternoon with a greater care than we had used since college days, when our feet were new and groping. What? That's what that says, groping. Feet were new and groping.
What are they? Beasts from X-Men?
Wait. Does grope have another meaning? Can we do a quick Dr. Google?
Yep.
Because that was a confusing.
I'm probably gonna get arrested for looking up the word groping. Oh, stupid! It automatically took me to grouping.
Okay. What does it say about groping? It's not a polite thing to do, but I'm tish. Okay. Like in this case, I'm thinking this. It's
Here we go. Search blindly or uncertainly by feeling with the hands, or fondle someone for sexual pleasure.
okay. I think it's that first one. So okay, Howard's using some very interesting language, but I think that's what he meant. That like when he says like our feet were groping, as in.
Wondering,
yeah,
searching,
exactly. Uncertain. So
it's just a very
unfortunate choice of words. Yeah, in a modern perspective. Yeah.
At least they weren't using their feet for the other thing.
No, feet as in feet. F-E-A-T.
Okay. I misheard. I was thinking of groping with their feet.
Our feet. Okay. All right. Moving on. I cannot express the wild, breathless suspense with which we waited for results on this first really fresh specimen. The first we could reasonably. I love the fact that they keep saying the word fresh, because I don't. I showed you the graphic for the podcast, which had the word fresh in it. And I picked that color intentionally because when I did the shine effect on it, like I knew this was gonna look like a cheesy 80s like neon sign. The first we could reasonably expect to open its lips in rational speech, perhaps to tell of what it had.
Hey, look at me! I'm sticking my head in his mouth. Look at me! I'm a one of those circus guys.
I love to see the guy whose head is so big. Whose mouth is so big you can stick your head in it. Okay. Perhaps,
ladies and gentlemen, the lead singer of Aerosmith.
Yeah, perhaps to tell of what it had seen beyond the unfathomable abyss. West was a materialist, believing in no soul and attributing all the working of consciousness to bodily phenomena. Consequently, he looked for no revelation of hideous secrets from gulfs and caverns beyond death's barrier. I did not wholly disagree with him, theoretically. yet held vague instinctive remnants of the primitive faith of my forefathers, so that I could not help eyeing the corpse with a certain amount of awe and terrible expectation.
Ugh.
Besides, I could not extract from my memory that hideous inhuman shriek we heard on the night we tried our first experiment in the deserted farmhouse. Deserted farmhouse in Oregon. Your scream game is on point today. Very little time had elapsed before I saw the attempt.
Well, if you had to be recording a podcast with me, you'd be screaming too.
Very little time had elapsed before I saw the attempt was not to be a total failure. A touch of color came to the cheeks, hitherto chalk white, and spread out under the curiously ample stubble of sandy beard.
It sounds like he's putting makeup on them.
Wes.
They're dead and fabulous.
Oh, yeah. Okay. West, who had his hand on the pulse of the left wrist, suddenly nodded significantly, and almost simultaneously, a mist appeared on the mirror inclined above the body's mouth. There followed a few spasmodic muscular motions. Spasmodic? Yeah, spasmodic. That is a cool word. Yeah. Yeah.
Wasn't that an 80s new wave band?
Very well could have been. Okay. And then audible breathing and visible motion of the chest. I looked. Incidentally, it's impolite to stare at a dead person's chest, but I'm tish. Okay. All right. I looked at the closed eyelids and thought I detected quivering. Then the lids opened, shewing eyes, which were gray, calm, and alive, but still unintelligent and not even curious. In a moment of fantastic whim, I whispered questions to the reddening ears, questions of other worlds of which the memory might still be present. Subsequent terror drove them.
Do they serve pizza up in heaven?
Subsequent terror drove them from my mind, and I think the last one which I repeated was, "Where have you been?" I do not yet know whether I was answered or not, for no sound came from the well-shaped mouth, but I do know that at that moment I firmly thought the thin lips moved silently, forming syllables I would have vocalized as "only now," if that phrase had possessed any sense or relevancy. At that moment, as I say, I was elated with the conviction that the one great goal had been attained, and that for the first time a reanimated corpse had uttered distinct words impelled by actual reason. In the next moment, there was no doubt about the triumph, no doubt that the solution had truly accomplished, at least temporarily, its full mission of restoring rational and articulate life to the dead. But in that triumph, there came to me the greatest of all horrors, not horror of the thing that spoke, but of the deed that I had witnessed, and of the man with whom my professional fortunes were joined. For that very fresh body, at last writhing into full and terrifying consciousness, with lids dilated, and the memory of its last scene on earth, threw out its frantic hands in a life and death struggle with the air, and suddenly collapsing into a second and final dissolution from which there could be no return, screamed out the cry that will ring eternally in my aching brain. "Help! Keep off, you cursed little towhead fiend! Keep the damned needle away from me!" And that is the end.
Yep, I've said that plenty of times at the hospital.
And that is the end of part 4. Yes. Yeah, so that was the...
that was getting quite thrilling there.
Yeah, but he then immediately dropped dead after having said that, so... Obviously, the guy didn't die from a heart attack. Obviously, Wes did something to him. All right, we're back from the break, and do you want to tell the audience the excellent joke that you came up while getting pizza?
I wouldn't call it excellent. I wouldn't call it excellent, but I had this most bizarre thought when I was walking to grab my pizza. I was picturing Reanimator as if it was like an episode of like the 60s Batman, like just the way that like they're acting and whatnot. and it just had a weird thought came to my mind. It would be like Herbman and Grave Robin.
Oh God, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. We still got 2 more chapters to go, and now shit's about to get real. Not to say that it hasn't gotten real before, but it's about to get realer, if you will. And it's now time for chapter 5 of Herbert West the Reanimator, The Horror from the Shadows. All right.
Oof, I think they're describing me there.
Many men have related hideous things not mentioned in print, such as Retro Kaiser. Remember to check him on Emerald Rangers. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, cheap joke. Which happened on the battlefields of the Great War. Some of these things have made me faint. Others have convulsed me with devastating nausea. While still others have made me tremble and look behind me in the dark.
What was that?
I always make that noise when I look over my shoulder. I was raised by circus clowns. Yet despite the worst of them, I believe I can myself relate the most hideous thing of all, the shocking and the unnatural, the unbelievable horror from the shadows. In 1915, I was a physician with the rank of first lieutenant in a Canadian regiment in Flanders, one of many Americans to proceed...
Howdy doodly there, neighbor.
Oh, fiddly-dee. One of many Americans to precede the government itself into the gigantic struggle. I had not entered the army on my own initiative, but rather as a natural result of the enlistment of the man whose indispensable assistant I was, the celebrated Boston surgical specialist, Dr. Herbert West. Dr. West had been avid for a chance to serve as surgeon in a great war. And when the chance had come, he carried me with him, almost against my will. Oh, how romantic.
Him throwing him over the shoulder, just walking, like, you're coming with me, mister.
Yeah, the bromance of the dead. Okay. There were...
Rebrominator.
Yeah. There were reasons why I would not have been glad to let the war separate us, reasons why I found the practice of medicine and the companionship of West more and more irritating. But when he had gone to Ottawa and through a colleague's influence secured a medical commission as major, I could not resist the imperious persuasion of one determined that I should accompany him in my usual capacity. I think this narrator might have a thing for guys in uniform. Okay. When I say that Dr. West was avid to serve in battle, I do not mean to imply that he was either naturally warlike or anxious for the safety of civilization. Always an ice-cold intellectual machine, slight, blonde, blue-eyed, and spectacled. And there it is again. It's gotten shorter. That's what she said.
Oh no!
sorry. That was low. Oh, I think he secretly sneered at my occasional bless you.
That was like a Monty Python style sneer, wasn't it?
That did sound like it. Is it Dusty there, or why did you?
That's just me making a sneering sound.
Oh, I thought you sneezed. Oh, that's why I said bless you. He sneered at my occasional martial enthusiasm and censures of supine neutrality. There was, however, something he wanted in embattled Flanders, and in order to secure it, he had to assume a military exterior. What he wanted was not a thing which many persons want, but something connected with the peculiar branch of medical science which he had chosen quite clandestinely.
He wanted a sponge bath.
I'm still trying to decide how to pronounce this word. Clandestinely. I'll go with that. Quite clandestinely to follow, and in which he had achieved amazing and occasional hideous results. It was, in fact, Nothing more or less than than an abundant supply of freshly killed men in every stage of dismemberment. Herbert West needed fresh bodies because his life work was the reanimation of the dead. This work was not known to the fashionable clientele who had so swiftly built up his fame after his arrival in Boston, but was only too well known to me, who had been his closest friend and sole assistant since the old days in Miskatonic University Medical School at Arkham. Oh, God. I love the fact that he always has to say the full name. He can't just say Miskatonic University, but no. Miskatonic University Medical School at Arkham. It's kind of like the mad Arab Al-Hazred whenever they bring up the Necronomicon. It was in those college days that he had begun his terrible experiments, first on small animals and then on human bodies, shockingly obtained. There was a solution which he injected into the veins of the dead things, and if they were fresh enough, they responded in strange ways. Yet, he had had much trouble in discovering the proper formula, for each type of organism was found to need stimulus especially adapted to it. Terror stalked him when he reflected on his partial failures, nameless things resulting from imperfect solutions, or from bodies insufficiently fresh. A certain number of these failures had remained alive. One was in an asylum while others had vanished, and as he thought of conceivable yet virtually impossible eventualities, he often shivered beneath his usual stolidity. Actually, that's interesting. They did not comment. Oh, wait. Yeah, sorry. The previous guy died. Yeah, the one that they choked to death. Yeah, okay. West had soon learned that absolute freshness was the prime requisite for useful specimens, and had accordingly resorted to frightful and unnatural expedients in body snatching. In college, and during our early practice together in the factory town of Bolton, my attitude towards him had been largely one of fascinated admiration. But as his boldness in methods grew, I began to develop a gnawing fear. I did not like the way he looked at healthy living bodies, and then there came a nightmarish session in the cellular laboratory when I learned that a certain specimen had been a living body when he secured it. That was the first time he had ever been able to revive the quality of rational thought in a corpse, and his success, obtained at such a loathsome cost, had completely hardened him.
Innuendo.
Yes, the bone of the dead. We can't seem to escape this bone, no matter what. Oh boy.
No, it's a tough one to toss away, isn't it?
A bone's connected to the leg bone. Okay. Of his methods, in the intervening 5 years, I dare not speak. I was held to him by sheer force of fear, and witnessed sights that no human tongue could repeat. Gradually, I came to find Herbert West himself more horrible than anything he did. That was when it dawned on me that his once normal scientific zeal for prolonging life had suddenly degenerated into a mere morbid and ghoulish curiosity and secret sense of charnel picturesqueness.
Yes, I've got an ex that's like that as well.
Oh boy. His interest. Yeah, exactly. It is kind of like seeming like, you know, there was a bit of a bromance going on, and now it's gone sour. Oh boy. His interest became a hellish and perverse addiction to the repellently and fiendishly abnormal. He gloated calmly over artificial monstrosities which would make most healthy men drop dead from fright and disgust. He became, behind his pallid intellectuality, a fastidious Baudelaire of physical experiment, a languid Elagabalus of the tombs. Wow, I have no idea what that is. Elagabalus.
Okay. Search blindly or unexcernally by feeling with the hands, or fondle someone for sexual. Oh no, wait, that was groping. How do you spell that again?
Yeah, sorry, it's a long one, yeah.
And the first thing that pops up is, Was Elagabalus a transvestite? He's a Roman Empire or emperor.
Okay, so was he like a especially mad emperor then? We're learning things here, ladies and gentlemen.
I know. Oh, where is it? Apparently, he was quite a controversial dude.
Yeah,
Where's all the good stuff? Where's all that good stuff? I'm just getting all the boring stuff.
because I know a few of the controversial Roman emperors, but this name actually is one that I'm not familiar with.
Marcus Aurelius Antonius, born Sextus Varius Avius Basinius,
Yes.
better known as his nicknames Elagabalus, or it was a Roman Empire from the year 218 to 222. While he was still a teenager, I'm reading this off of Wikipedia, by the way.
Yep.
Nowhere special. His short reign was notorious for sex scandals and religious controversy.
Oh boy. The bone of the dead.
We keep going back to that, don't we?
Yeah, but okay. So this guy,
like a bad zombie movie, you can't keep him down.
but I'm dish. That would be a great, what do you call it? Tagline for that kind of movie. Dangers he met unflinchingly, crimes he committed unmoved. I think the climax came when he had proved his point that rational life can be restored and had sought new worlds to conquer by experimenting on the reanimation of detached parts of bodies. He had wild and original ideas on the independent vital properties of organic cells and nerve tissue separated from natural physiological systems, and achieved some hideous preliminary results in the form of nerve-dying, artificially nourished tissue obtained from the nearly hatched eggs of an indescribable tropical reptile. Sorry, I was expecting it to be in plural, and I realized I skipped the article, yeah.
What? Sorry, that just sounds like a great name for a knockoff Godzilla movie. Indescribable tropical reptile.
2 biological points he was exceedingly anxious to settle. First, whether any amount of consciousness and rational action be possible without the brain. Fa-la-di-dash. And second, whether any kind of ethereal, intangible relation distinct from the material cells may exist to link the surgically separated parts of what has previously been a single living organism. All this research work required a prodigious supply of freshly slaughtered human flesh, and that was why Herbert West had entered the Great War.
I'm getting hungry again.
No, Kaiser, no more human remains.
I know, they go right to my thighs.
The phantasmal, unmentionable thing occurred one midnight late in March 1915 in a field hospital behind the lines of St. Eloi.
I like how he says, undescribable, yet he's proceeding to describe it.
I wonder even now if it could have been other than a demonic dream of delirium. Oh, sorry, by the way, I haven't pointed this. I forgot to point this out in the previous, because I think the second chapter was called The Plague Demon. But I haven't been pointing it out, but of course, Lovecraft spelled demon with an A, so as in D-A-E-M-O-N, so like that.
Demon.
Yeah, the old way of spelling, which I always find really cool to see, actually. Like sometimes like he could get a little like I've mentioned before that Lovecraft could get a little overly fancy with the language, but that little typographical point I think is kind of fun. West had a private laboratory in the east room of the barn-like temporary edifice. Just can't get rid of those barns, can he? Assigned him on his plea that he was devising new and radical methods for the treatment of hitherto hopeless cases of maiming. There he worked like a butcher in the midst of his gory wares. I could never get used to the levity with which he handled and classified certain things. At times he actually did perform marvels of surgery for the soldiers, but his chief delights were of a less public and philanthropic kind, requiring many explanations of sounds which seemed peculiar, even amidst the Babble of the Damned. That would be a great name for a heavy metal album, by the way. Babble of the Damned. Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's what this podcast is going to be renamed into.
No, I'm pretty sure it's going to be called The Bone of the Dead. Among these sounds were frequent revolver shots, surely not uncommon on a battlefield, but distinctly uncommon in an hospital. In an hospital. Oh, okay, come on, Howard. I think we've had another incorrect article before. That always... Sorry, I know, that always snaps me completely out of the story. I guess you can tell I'm an English teacher. Okay. Dr. West's reanimated specimens were not meant for long existence or a large audience. Besides human tissue, West employed much of
the show.
West employed much of the reptile embryo tissue, which he had cultivated with such singular results. It was better than human material for maintaining life in organless fragments. And that was now...
is this going to turn into Thing's origin story? Like,
It's one of Herbert's failed experiments. Good bait. Yeah. And that was now my friend's chief activity in a dark corner of the laboratory over a queer incubating burner. He kept a large covered vat full of this reptilian cell matter, which multiplied and grew puffily and hideously. Puffily is not a word that I was expecting there.
He's running out of words.
On the night of which I speak, we had a splendid new specimen, a man at once physically powerful and of such high mentality that a sensitive nervous system was assured. It was rather ironic, for he was the officer who had helped West to his commission, and who was now to have been our associate. Moreover, he had in the past secretly studied the theory of reanimation to some extent under West. Major Sir Eric Moreland Chaplain-Lee, DSO, was the greatest surgeon in our division, and had been hastily assigned to the Saint-Ulai sector when news of the heavy fighting reached headquarters. He had come in an aeroplane piloted by the intrepid Lieutenant Ronald Hill, only to be shot down when directly over his destination.
I'm just picturing clowns jumping out of the airplane now.
Because of Ronald.
Yeah.
Oh boy. By the way, also another weird typographical point. For some reason, in aeroplane, the E has umlauts over it. I think we've seen that in another one, but I can't quite remember. The fall had been spectacular and awful. Hill was unrecognizable afterward, but the wreck yielded up the great surgeon in a nearly decapitated but otherwise intact condition.
We have the technology. We can rebuild him.
West had greedily seized the lifeless thing, which had once been his friend and fellow scholar, and I shuddered when he finished severing the head, placed it in his hellish vat of pulpy reptile tissue.
Plop.
To preserve it for future experiments, and proceeded to treat the decapitated body on the operating table. He injected new blood, joined certain veins, arteries, and nerves at the headless neck, and closed the ghastly aperture with engrafted skin from an unidentified specimen which had borne an officer's uniform. I knew what he wanted, to see if his highly organized body could exhibit without its head any of the signs of mental life which had distinguished Sir Eric Moreland Chaplain-Lee.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing the birth of parliaments.
Once a student of reanimation, this silent trunk was now gruesomely called upon to exemplify it, and there was also an elephant present for some reason. I can still see Herbert West under the sinister electric light as he injected his reanimating solution into the arm of the headless body. The scene I cannot describe.
Ugh.
The scene I cannot describe, but I am going to do it anyway because this is how prose works. I should faint.
It was like, you know when you get your Thanksgiving turkey and you have to stick your insides in to put the stuffing in? It's like that. It's like preparing a turkey.
I should faint if I tried it, for there is madness in a room full of classified charnel things, with blood and lesser human debris almost ankle deep on the slimy floor, and with hideous reptilian abnormalities sprouting bubbling and baking over a winking bluish-green specter of dim flame in a far corner of black shadows.
That was quite a gory description.
Yeah, exactly. The specimen, as West repeatedly observed, had a splendid nervous system, much as was expected of it, and as a few twitching motions began to appear, I could see the feverish interest on West's face. He was ready, I think, to see proof of his increasingly strong opinion that consciousness, reason, and personality can exist independently of the brain. That man has no central connective spirit, but is merely a machine of nervous matter, each section more or less complete in itself. In one triumphant demonstration, West was about to relegate the mystery of life to the category of myth. The body now twitched more vigorously, and beneath our avid eyes commenced to heave in a frightful way.
Ah!
The arms stirred disquietingly, legs drew up, and various muscles contracted in a repulsive kind of writhing. Then the headless thing threw out its arms in a gesture which was unmistakably one of desperation. An intelligent
It should be brown. It should be attached to my body, but it should be missing my head.
An intelligent desperation apparently sufficient to prove every theory of Herbert West. Certainly the nerves were recalling the man's last act in life, the struggle to get free from the falling aeroplane. What followed, I shall never positively know. It may have been wholly an hallucination from
airplane, probably.
It may have been wholly an hallucination from the shock caused at that instant by the sudden and complete destruction of the building in a cataclysm of German shell fire.
They get them! Ah!
Wow, those were very quiet. Could you try to do the explosion a bit more strongly?
Boom!
All right, that was better. Who can gainsay it? Gainsay? Okay.
Gainsay?
Yeah. Gainsay. All one word.
Okay, let me... Gainsay. In order to grab someone for sexual... Oh, no, that's groping again. Here we go. Gainsay meaning deny or contradict a fact or statement.
Ah. Oh, that must be like an expression that's kind of fallen out of use. Fascinating. Okay. Who can gainsay
bring
it?
that one back.
Who can gainsay it, since West and I were the only proved survivors? West liked to think that before his recent disappearance, but there were times when he could not, for it was queer that we both had the same hallucination. The hideous occurrence itself was very simple, notable only for what it implied. The body on the table had risen with a blind and terrible groping, and we had heard a sound. I should not call the sound a voice, for it was too awful, and yet it still... Frank, is that you? I'm not partial to desserts myself. Actually, you sounded very, very close to the creature from Young Frankenstein. That was very good. And yet its timbre was not the most awful thing about it. Neither was its message. It had merely screamed, "Jump, Ronald, for God's sakes! Jump!" An awful thing was its source.
That's quite impressive for a headless body.
No, that was the head in the vat, obviously.
Okay.
For it had come from the large covered vat in the ghoulish corner of the crawling black shadows. And that is the end of part 5.
And I've noticed that the last 2 chapters are starting to sound a lot more like the movie now. Like the movie pinched from some stuff from those previous 2 chapters, like the I don't know if you mind me spoiling.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Like the big muscular man that they brought back from the dead, and of course this part with the head coming back to life and the body.
Yeah, exactly. That is a
although granted it was a different person.
Yeah,
it was a completely different character that happened to, but still.
And I also I crack up also that he has to also say Sir Eric Moreland Clapham-Lee the full name every time. Like you can't just say Sir Clapham-Lee or just Eric. Either you could cut it a little short there. But now we are finally coming to chapter 6, the final chapter of Herbert West, the Reanimator. So, without further ado, let's get into Chapter 6, The Tomb Legions. When Dr. Herbert West disappeared a year ago, the Boston police questioned me closely. They suspected that I was holding Hey, it's the police officers from the Telltale Heart coming to make a cameo again. It was always so nice to see those old coppers. They suspected that I was holding something back, but they are incompetent and could not even catch a screaming madman who kept hearing a beating heart. So who am I to judge? Okay, they suspected that I was holding back something back, and perhaps suspected graver things, but I could not tell them the truth because they would not have believed it. They knew indeed that West had been connected with activities beyond the credence of ordinary men, for his hideous experiments in the reanimation of dead bodies had long been too extensive to admit of perfect secrecy. But the final soul-shattering catastrophe held elements of demonic fantasy, which make even me doubt the reality of what I saw. And again, demonic with the A, and again, I think we said this in a previous story, but Lovecraft also loved to write fantasy with PH instead of an F, so yeah. I was West's closest friend and only confidential assistant. We had met years before in medical school, and from the first I had shared his terrible researches. He had slowly tried to perfect a solution which, injected into the veins of the newly deceased, would restore life, a labor demanding an abundance of fresh corpses and therefore involving the most unnatural actions. Still, more shocking were the products of some of the experiments, grisly masses of flesh that had been dead. But that West waked to a blind, brainless, and nauseous animation. These were the usual results, for in order to reawaken the mind, it was necessary to have specimens so absolutely fresh that no decay could possibly affect the delicate brain cells. This need for very fresh corpses had been West's moral undoing. They were hard to get, and one awful day he had secured his specimen while it was still alive and vigorous. A struggle, a needle, and a powerful alkaloid had transformed it to a very fresh corpse, and the experiment had succeeded for a brief and memorable moment, but West had emerged with a soul calloused and seared, and a hardened eye, which sometimes glanced with the kind of hideous and calculating appraisal at men of especially sensitive brain and especially vigorous physique. Also, he sounded a bit like Popeye for some reason. Towards the last, I became acutely afraid of West, for he began to look at me that way. People did not seem to notice his glances, but they noticed my fear, and after his disappearance used that as the basis for some absurd suspicions. West, in reality, was more afraid than I, for his abominable pursuits entailed a life of furtiveness and dread of every shadow. Partly it was the police he feared, but sometimes his nervousness was deeper and more nebulous, touching on certain indescribable things into which he had injected morbid life, and from which he had not seen that life depart. He usually finished his experiments with a revolver, but a few times he had not been quick enough. There was that first specimen on whose rifled grave marks of clawing were later seen.
Oh, I just thought of a really awful pun. I'm just picturing the doctor walking around the holes of his gun, and he's like, "Ready for your shot."
There was also that Arkham professor's body, which had done cannibal things before it had been captured and thrust unidentified into a madhouse cell at Sefton, where it beat the walls for 16 years. Most of the other possible surviving results were things less...
What did the wall ever do to him?
Most of the other possibly surviving results were things less easy to speak of, for in later years West's scientific zeal had degenerated to an unhealthy and fantastic mania, and he had spent his chief skill in vitalizing not entire human bodies, but isolated parts of bodies, or parts joined to organic matter other than human. It had become fiendishly disgusting by the time he disappeared. Many of the experiments could not even be hinted at it in print. The Great War, through which both of us served as surgeons, had intensified this side of West. In saying that West's fear of his specimens was nebulous, I have in mind particularly its complex nature. Part of it came merely from knowing of the existence of such nameless monsters, while another part arose from apprehension of the bodily harm they might under certain circumstances do him. Their disappearance added horror to the situation. For them, all West knew the whereabouts of only one, the pitiful, a silent thing. Then there was a more subtle fear, a very fantastic sensation resulting from a curious experiment in the Canadian Army in 1915. West, in the midst of a severe battle, had reanimated Major Sir Eric Moreland Clapham-Lee, DSO, a fellow physician, and who knew about his experiments and could have duplicated them. The head had been removed, so that the possibilities of quasi-intelligent life in the trunk might be investigated. Just as the building was wiped out by a German shell, there had been...
Nearly made a dog sound there. I'm glad you went I thought he was going to say shepherds for a second. Roof, roof.
The trunk had moved intelligently. I love that they keep using the word trunk to refer to like Chapham-Lee's body. And unbelievably to relate,
I stole my luggage.
we were both sickeningly sure that articulate sounds had come from the detached head as it lay in a shadowy corner of the laboratory. The shell had been merciful in a way, but West could never feel as certain as he wished that we two were the only survivors. He used to make shuddering conjectures about the possible actions of a headless physician with the power of reanimating the dead. West's last quarters were in a venerable house of much elegance, overlooking one of the oldest burying grounds in Boston.
Finally upgraded from a barn.
Yeah, exactly. He had chosen the place for purely symbolic and fantastically aesthetic reasons, since most of the interments were of the colonial period, and therefore of little use to a scientist seeking of very fresh bodies. The laboratory was in a subcellar secretly constructed by imported workmen, and contained a huge incinerator for the quiet and complete disposal of such bodies, or fragments and synthetic mockeries of bodies, as might remain from the morbid experiments and unhallowed...
And I can cook a really mean pizza in it, too.
unhallowed amusements of the owner. During the... have you heard about that guy who planned to have his body buried with a bunch of corn in it to scare the shit out of the cremator? Yeah, during the excavation of this cellar of excavation of the cellar, the workmen had struck some exceedingly ancient masonry, undoubtedly connected with the old burying ground, and yet far too deep to correspond with any known sepulture therein. After a number of calculations, West decided that it represented some secret chamber beneath the tomb of the Averils, where the last interment had been made in 1768. I was with him when he studied the nitrous, dripping walls laid bare by the spades and mattocks of the men, and was prepared for the gruesome thrill which would attend the unconvening of centuried grave secrets. But for the first time, West's new timidity conquered his natural curiosity, and he betrayed his degenerating fiber by ordering the masonry left intact and plastered over. Thus it remained till that final hellish night, part of the walls of the secret laboratory. I speak of West's decadence, but must add that it was a purely mental and intangible thing. Outwardly, he was the same to the last. Calm, cold, slight, and yellow-haired, with spectacled blue eyes, and a general aspect of youth which years and fears seemed never to change. He seemed calm, even when he thought that the clawed grave and looked over his shoulder, even when he thought of the carnivorous thing that gnawed and pawed at Sefton bars. The end of Herbert West began one evening in our joint study when he was dividing his curious glance between the newspaper and me. A strange headline item had struck at him from the crumpled pages, and a nameless title And the nameless Titan claw had seemed to reach down through 16 years. Something fearsome and incredible had happened at Sefton Asylum 50 miles away, stunning the neighborhood and baffling the police. In the small hours of the morning, a body of silent men had entered the grounds, and their leader had aroused the attendants. He was a menacing military figure who talked without moving his lips, and whose voice seemed almost ventriloquially connected with an immense black case he carried. Ventriloquially is a difficult word to say. His expressionless face was handsome to the point of radiant beauty, but had shocked the superintendent when the hall light fell on it, for it was a wax face with eyes of painted glass. Some nameless accident had befallen this man. A larger man guided his steps, a repellent hulk whose bluish face seemed half eaten away by some unknown malady. The speaker had asked for the custody of the cannibal monster committed from Arkham 16 years before, and upon being refused, gave a signal which precipitated a shocking riot. The fiends had beaten, trampled, and bitten every attendant who did not flee, killing four and finally...
Riding them all, that's impressive.
Killing four and finally succeeding in the liberation of the monster. Those victims who could recall the event without hysteria swore that the creatures had acted less like men than like unthinkable automata guided by the wax-faced leader. By the time help could be summoned, every trace of the men and their mad charge had vanished. From the hour of reading this item until midnight, West sat almost paralyzed. At midnight, the doorbell rang, startling him fearfully.
Ding dong.
All the servants were asleep in the attic, so I answered the... So I answered the bell. As I have told the police, there was no wagon in the street, but only a group of strange-looking figures bearing a large square box, which they deposited in the hallway after one of them had grunted in a highly unnatural voice, "Express prepaid." They filed out of the house with a jerky tread, and as I watched them go, I had an odd idea that they were turning toward the ancient cemetery on which the back of the house abutted. That's a funny way. That's a funny word. When I slammed the door after them, West came downstairs and looked at the box.
Bum, 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 bum. What the hell is that?
It was about 2 feet square and bore West's correct name and present address. It also bore the inscription,
"Do not open to Christmas."
No, it also bore the inscription, "From Eric Morland, Clapham-Lee, St. Eli, Flanders." 6 years before, in Flanders, a shelled hospital had fallen upon the headless reanimated trunk of Dr. Chapman-Lee. Well, finally, he used a shorter version of the name, God damn it. And upon the detached head, which perhaps had uttered articulate sounds. West was not even excited now. His condition was more ghastly. Quickly, he said, "It's the finish, but let's incinerate this." We carried the thing down to the laboratory, listening. I do not remember many particulars. You can imagine my state of mind, but it is a vicious lie to say it was Herbert West's body which I put into the incinerator. We both inserted the whole unopened wooden box, closed the door, and then started the electricity. Yeah. Nor did any sound come from the box, after all. It was West who first noticed the falling plaster on the part of the wall where the ancient tomb masonry had been covered up. I was going to run, but he stopped me. Then I saw
you're not going anywhere.
Then I saw a small black aperture, felt a ghoulish wind of ice, and smelled the charnel bowels of the putrescent earth. There was no sound, but just then the electric lights went out, and I saw outlined against some phosphorescence of the netherworld a horde of silent, toiling things which only insanity or worse could create. Their outlines were human, semi-human, fractionally human, and not human at all. The horde was grotesquely heterogeneous. They were removing the stones quietly, one by one, from the centuried wall, and then, as the breach became large enough, they came out into the laboratory in single file, led by a stalking thing with a beautiful head made of wax. A sort of mad-eyed monstrosity behind the leaders seized on Herbert West. West did not resist or utter a sound. Then all sprang at him and tore him to pieces before my eyes. Bearing the fragments away into the subterranean vault of fabulous abominations, West's head was carried off by the wax-headed leader, who wore a Canadian officer's uniform. As it disappeared, I saw...
Fatality!
As it disappeared, I saw that the blue eyes behind the spectacles were hideously blazing with their first touch of frantic, visible emotion. Servants found me unconscious in the morning. West was gone. The incinerator contained only unidentifiable ashes. Detectives have questioned me, but what can I say? The Sefton tragedy, they will not connect with West. Not that, nor the men with the box, whose existence they deny. I told them of the vault, and they pointed to the unbroken plaster wall and laughed. So I told them no more. They imply that I am a madman or a murderer. Probably I am mad. But I might not be mad if those accursed tomb legions had not been so silent. The end. And here we came to the end of Herbert West Reanimator.
That got quite death metal towards the end there, didn't it?
Yeah. It's been a while since I've read the full ending, but I do seem to recall like West got torn to shreds by the end anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like something.
That's not what happened in the movie.
Well, yeah, no, because the movie has sequels, so I assume that he survived that time. But yeah, so that is a bit, that final chapter is a little bit. It's kind of like we had to close the story out a little bit. I'm not a particular big fan of that. The fifth chapter, there's like a bit of a morbid comedy to it, with the jump Ronald jump thing, and the fourth one's pretty, fourth chapter is pretty disturbing because we're kind of shown that that West has gone like fully cuckoo bananas by that point. Like he doesn't care. He just he'll just do whatever it takes to get those corpses.
Yeah, I've not heard the full story before. I'm only familiar with like the first few chapters originally because I heard them in an audio play. Funny enough, as a special feature on the Reanimator Blu-ray disc.
All right, yeah. And I read this. This is one of those very early Lovecraft stories that I read. I mentioned before that because I'm not a huge fan of Lovecraft, but I because years and years ago I borrowed a book from the library that was translated into Finnish, and I wasn't a big fan of it. But this was one of those stories that I did remember very vividly. And you know what? Over time, this has really grown on me. And I would say it's actually one of my favorite Lovecraft stories, period, which is ironic when you consider that this is kind of considered like one of Lovecraft's like least accomplished works. And Lovecraft himself didn't like it very much, but yeah, I like it. It was a fun read. It's always a fun read to me, and there are definitely very memorable segments to it. So that's actually the reason I kind of like it. It's not like absolute favorite or anything, but it is. I think it's a good end. Yeah. My favorite stories, I haven't actually talked about that very much, but the ones that we still have yet to have done, the Dunwich horror and then the Color Out of Space. Those are like my two favorites.
Those should be good ones.
Yeah, and they're also a bit on the long side, so when we do those, we are going to have to probably split them off into separate episodes as well. But yeah, we went a bit on the goofy side already at the start there. But, that ending is pretty grim. That ending is like pretty grim, and, there's not like a lot of pomp and circumstance. I do kind of wonder what was the dealio with the false box which they incinerate, or maybe what was that like the Doom Legion? Not the Doom Legion. Sorry, tomb legions, like covering their tracks. Like there's this indistinguishable bunch of ashes in the incinerator. Like, is that how they plan to like indicate like, oh, Herbert, that's probably Herbert's body in there? But
Unless they burned with him, like dragged him to hell, so to speak.
yeah, no, I think that they just dragged him away to the cemetery. But yeah, I guess you could maybe see it like that way because like the narrator is also kind of feeling a little bit like he's losing his marbles by the end.
Yes, this is gonna sound weird. Lovecraft fans are probably gonna hate me for this because I felt like that story could have ended it a little bit differently. Honestly, I would have thought an even crueler punishment to end that is to not just kill and decapitate Herbert West, but bring him back with his own serum and have him live an eternal living death. Being like a zombie for like in prison somewhere for the rest of his who knows what.
Well, that's
sort of an ironic punishment.
Well, that's kind of what I assume. Well, because it's left a bit vague, but I assume that that's the reason they carry his body away, because Clapham-Lee, who was obviously the wax-headed leader there, because it's implied that he knew about like West's experiments. So maybe that's what they did. They reanimated his head now that it's like. His body's been torn to shreds, and they will do some horrible things to him. But
like play basketball with him.
Yeah, something like that. so because the ending is left intentionally quite vague. It's very, very, it's quite interesting in my opinion. Yeah. Okay. I was wondering, like, there was some other thing. I guess it's just like the first episode, the first story is a bit of a slow burn because we don't really ever find out anything about that one random corpse because they don't even really witness it. But then all the other creatures, it all comes around from the second chapter onward. When the guy in the asylum that was the resurrected Dr. Halsey and everything. But yeah, that I find this actually quite a fun story to read overall. But yeah,
you probably like the movies, and the movies it's quite a unique take of the story, but it is still quite fun and a little bit disturbing, a little bit gruesome, but still fun.
Yeah. I expect as much. Yeah. So I probably will at some point like take a chance and just look at those. But I think we're now done with today's Unnamed Horror. Thank you for listening if you are still listening at this point. And we're looking forward to some more horror stories in the future. So I'm TheHande Bäckinen. See you on the next one. Want to say bye to the listeners?
Goodbye for now.
Bye.